See here John's experience as the task force commander on Op Render Safe. So the Australian Defence Force on a yearly basis clears explosive remnants of war resulting from the conflict in the South. This year, so in the past, the Royal Canadian Navy has had participation, and this year it had a much more of a joint flavor and orientation. And the Canadian objectives were to reinvigorate conventional munitions disposal. So based on our time in Afghanistan and the concentration on improvised explosive device disposal, there was skill set fade in that other area. Another one is exercise personnel and joint multinational EOD capability, and John's team was truly joint. John, the floor is yours. And I'm sure what you're doing.
All right, sirs, ladies, gentlemen, fellow engineers, my name's Captain John Atinchek. If we haven't had the chance to meet, I'm going to give you my presentation on Operation Render Safe, just took place in November. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to go over the history of Render Safe, our task force, where we were working, the UXO problem, the operations we took, and then some challenges that we encountered, and then what we did. So the history of Op Render Safe. So the Australians in the past decade have been doing different explosive remnants of war clearances in the Southwest Pacific. In 2009, when they did it in the Solomon Islands, that was the first Render Safe, and the difference was that was an enduring operation. So after that, every 2 years, a biennial operation took place, and so the third one took place, being in the Solomon Islands again, here in November. And as the sir said, the Canadian Navy has sent observers in the past to participate with the Australians, but this was truly the first time that we've sent a task force of this size to participate. So our mission was to clear explosive remnants of war during the period 5 November to 30 November to dispose explosive remnants of war from the Solomon Islands. The objectives, once again, reinvigorate that advanced CMD capability that we've lost after a decade of counter-ID operations, as well as work in a multinational EOD task force and assist in the Southwest Pacific. So Task Force Solomon Islands was a 10-man contingent that came together in October to do a quick refresher exercise for advanced CMD skills and whatnot. They tagged into TAS Runner, which is an Air Force-led annual exercise. The task force was composed of myself as a task force commander, a senior technical advisor who is Chief Petty Officer First Class Deploy from Joint Counter-Explosive Task Force, as well as a dive team and a land team. The dive team was made of 2 divers from FDU Pacific, as well as 2 divers from FDU Atlantic. And the land team was composed of combat engineers from 1 and 2 CER and air weapons technicians. Yeah, that's right. Air weapons technicians from 14 and 19 EDF. CJTF 663 was the multinational task force, Australian Navy led. It's approximately 250 persons, composed of 10 EOD teams from Australia, the US, New Zealand, ourselves, and as well as the Royal Solomon Island Police Force EOD team that they have there. The 2 ships they had with them was a Diamantina and the Terracan, Diamantina being a mine hunter and the Terracan as a landing craft. So where are the Solomon Islands exactly? When I told my family and friends where I was going, they thought I was going on vacation somewhere off of Cuba. So actually, it is a chain of islands, approximately 1,000 nautical miles northeast of Australia, borders the country of Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia. Where we were operating was the central province of the Solomon Islands, and mainly the main island of Guadalcanal, as well as a chain of Russell Islands and Tulagi. So the demographics, the island chain is composed of 942 islands. Approximately 300 of those are inhabited by about 500,000 people. It's 93% Melanesian, approximately 3% Polynesian, with about 1,000 Chinese citizens and a handful of expats, mainly from Australia and Britain. Over 74 languages are spoken, English being the official, but Pidgin is the most commonly spoken. The average age of the country is 21, so a very young population, and an 85% unemployment rate. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what kind of country it is. As most of the people are self-sustainable on micro farms, little plots of land. Wantockism is prevalent. What that is wantockism is favoritism through your tribe and your village. The problem with that is it runs through their government, which is a parliamentary democracy. So political favor is given to those of the same village and not based on ideals, creating a lot of instability and mistrust in the government. And that's led to a conflict in 1998 to 2000 between the Malaysian and the Gual over land and jobs. The government in this unstable time asked the Pacific countries for assistance, which was responded to from Australia-led force called Ramsey, the Regional Assistant Mission to the Solomon Islands. And they sent a force of 2,000 personnel from Australia, New Zealand, as well as 20 other Pacific countries. Ramsey's main objective when they were there was to de-arm these tension, as I call it, tension fighters, as well as bring some stability to try to regrow the economy. The military pulled out of the Solomon Islands in August, so a couple months before we got there, and they've now changed their role away from de-arming and stability and now towards capacity building of the Solomon Island Police Force, which plays into render safe as we were capacity building as well with the Royal Solomon Island Police Force EOD team. We were housed at the Guadalcanal Beach Resort. During the creation of the orders, everyone thought this was a 5-star beaches or sandals resort, but no, this wasn't. This house is Ramsey, so it was Australian Federal Police run, and it was manned 24/7. As you can see, the gates of semi-permanent building, very shack-like, but did have the amenities of a bar and a gym and whatnot. So it wasn't too uncomfortable. Here's just a couple of shots of GBR. So the reason we were here, World War II, the Battle of Guadalcanal was the first main offensive of the Allies against the Empire of Japan. It was fought between August 1942 and February 1943, claimed approximately 2,000 American lives, 26,000 Japanese lives, and lots of ordnance left there for us to clean up today. So the explosive remnants of war. We were expecting to encounter, which we did, everything from small arms, grenades, up to naval mines and airplane bombs. It was mostly all American and Japanese ordnance, all 70 years old, been rusting away under the elements for that amount of time. There was rumor that there could be chemical munitions on Russell Islands, which was an ammunition depot after the main Battle of Guadalcanal. The American forces supposedly had gone in to clean this up in the early 2000s, but we knew that there was still a possibility. We were not either equipped or qualified or mandated to deal with any kind of chemical munitions. So if we did encounter any, we would mark and send it up to the Australians. So the ERW problem to the country, it was a hazard to both the locals and the economy. Because farming is so important there, and the foliage is so intense, many times the locals would light a fire to the ground to clear the vegetation away for farming. But with so much ordnance in the ground, this would often high order the ordnance and injure people. So that's probably the most common, and this isn't just a once in a while. This is happening a couple times weekly all across the country. At the same time, with a lot of kids with nothing to do and a lot of ordnance hanging around, kids are finding the ordnance, they're tossing it in the fires, they're playing with it, which is also injuring and killing people as well. To the economy, finding the ordnance there would shut down building sites a couple days up to a week, as well as harvesting timber. Because there's so many reports coming in to the Royal Solomon Island Police Force, all across the country, they're not able to deal with so much, so it takes a while to get to it, which slows down building and progress. Fish bombs. So this was, what these are there, when locals find the ordnance, they cut them open, they melt out the explosives, and they put them into a container such as a beer bottle, and they throw a crude fuse on it, such as a fireworks fuse, and they throw it in the water, and the overpressure kills the fish and allows the fish to float up to the top. The problem with this is the way that they're opening up the ordnance is they're using angle grinders and hacksaws, which doesn't go too well. And usually a couple people die every year. A serious incident in 2006, a couple men and a child were killed from one piece of ordnance. And at the same time, these people are coming onto other people's land to dig up fish, to dig up ordnance to sell or to use themselves as fish bombs. So overall, it's seen as a nuisance in the area. But there is no real threat of these being used as IEDs, and there was no history of them being used as IEDs during the during the Civil War back in the 90s. So generally just a fishing-related hazard. So the Royal Solomon Island Police Force EOD team, it's a 25-person team who were trained by Golden West, which is an NGO that works in Thailand and Cambodia, training the locals to be able to deal with their ERW problem. They operate out of Hell's Point, which is an old World War II ammunition depot with its own fair share of ordnance scattered around, and that gives them a range as well as a holdings facility and an area to x-ray and to dispose of their ordnance. They are SMEs in ordnance identification as they've been living with it for their whole lives. So being able to identify a 70-year-old piece of ordnance that looks like a rock to us is pretty handy. As well as when all our teams went out, they had a RSIPF EOD member with them to act as a translator, as well as gain a little more trust with the local population. So the RSIPF EOD members, when they have ordnance that is able to be moved and they move it back to Hell's Point, they x-ray every single piece of ordnance to ensure that it's high explosive and not white phosphorus. And they do that to ensure that if it is high explosive, they're able to cut it with a mobile cutting unit. This is something that the NGO Golden West had developed and uses once again in Thailand and Cambodia. And what it is it's a slow-moving bandsaw, and it will cut through high explosive ordnance. So this is a 75mm projectile that this cut through in approximately 6 to 7 minutes. This raises a lot of eyebrows for our operators because this is against everything that we've ever known or been taught in any of our courses. Coolant is run across the blade, and they've been using it for approximately 8 years and never had a mishap with it. It is operated remotely. Cameras are set up. They're well away behind a berm in a sea can watching this happen. But they'll cut anything from small projectiles right up to 1,000-pound airplane bombs, which will take up to about 30 minutes to cut through. Once they've cut through it, they'll melt out the explosives, and then they'll sell the metal for scrap, which also goes towards funding them to keep going and doing what they do. Another interesting thing we learned is their use of nitromethane data as opposed to us using C4, as it's more economical for them to make this. Nitromethane, as many of you know, is an explosive on its own. It's used in race cars as well as hobby aircraft and hobby cars. That combined with data, which is an industrial agent, helps stabilize it. So it is a high explosive. You can see them mixing it right here. The dye color, that's just so they know they've mixed it, a bit of a safety precaution. And they use it the exact same as you would C4. You see them frapping it here, just on a pile of ordnance. This is a bit of an experiment that I believe the New Zealand operators did. They tried some of the nitromethane data in a shape charge to see if it would work the same. It didn't have the same explosive velocity to function the shape charge to render safe the munition, but it was good to use. It was stable enough in the temperatures we're operating in, which are approximately 40 degrees. A lot of times with stuff like this, you're not supposed to, should not be above 25 degrees. They claim as well that it is environmentally sound, but I'm not sure how they can really back that up. While we were there, we did use all Australian explosives, so we weren't using the NMD as much. We were using the Australian C4. So how do we locate the ordnance? As a starting point, we looked at history. We looked at where the battle sites were, Bloody Ridge, the Gifu, Alligator Creek. Use that as a starting point. From there, our teams would go out and talk to the locals and get an idea, because from all the kids running through the jungle, they'll be able to tell us a lot better than us just walking straight into the jungle with a mine detector to try to find something. Metal detectors were ineffective on the land because of all the scraps. There's still broken down tanks, there's still generators and machinery strewn across the jungle floor, there's still shrapnel all over the place. So we weren't able to use that. A lot of times we'd have to bring the locals with us in the vehicle to find where something is. A couple goose chases happened where there's supposedly an airplane bomb in the middle of a creek a couple 100 meters that way, and the guys were out all day trying to find it and found nothing. So a lot of times it's the locals getting in the car and showing us exactly where things were. Some places were so contaminated with ordnance, such as around Henderson Airfield, which exchanged hands a couple times, multiple both naval and artillery bombardments, that on one farm alone, I believe over 2,000 pieces of ordnance were found. And the operators walking up and down clearing, at the end of the day, one guy noticed on the path that there was a grenade under the path the whole time that everyone was been walking across. It's just that contaminated with ordnance. Clearing. As you see here, there's one of our operators of the 60 series trying to identify the best render safe procedure on ordnance. Depending on what the situation was and the condition of the ordnance, the operators could just say, well, not comfortable with this, carry on with other searches, mark it, and then that night figure out a plan of attack with the multinational headquarters and talk to their teams to figure out the best way to do things. If they were able to deal with it at that time, then they would. And then their options generally would be to blow it in place if it was not practical, to move it out of wherever it was, if it was a deep valley, deep in the jungle where you really could not move it out by any means, or if it was too dangerous to move or render safe. A lot of the ordnance was either non-fused or non-fired and just got dumped off a truck or was a cache and was safe to pick up and carry away. And then as well as some stuff did have to be render safe and the fuse removed and then was able to be moved to Hell's Point. So here's a couple pictures of the different BIPs that took place. A notable mention is this ordnance, which a tree grew around and had to be blown out, as well as here's an unidentifiable piece of ordnance. The coral just grew over. As you can see, there's a linear or a flexible linear shape charge across it. And then here's, I believe, naval projectile. Pick up, carry away. Is a New Zealand team moving an airplane bomb with both fuses knocked off. And once again, these would be moved to the storage facility in Hell's Point, where then they'd be x-rayed to see if there was a burster, if it was a white phos or high explosive round. And here's a couple shots of a 50 cal de-armor. This one's being lined up for a 60 millimeter mortar fuse. And I'm not sure if you can see this is a 60 millimeter anti-tank rocket that the 50 cal de-armor is lined up for. The underwater search with our underwater team. So once again, the way they started to locate items, looking at history, where the main battles were, they did not, because of the underwater topography of the islands, the shelf goes out a certain distance, then just drops off where it's well beyond their depth to search. So within the shoreline, they'd look at the history of the conflict, as well as use something called REMUS, which is this right here. It's a robotic torpedo-like thing they put in the ground, and what it does is it runs the course of the area of the shoreline that they set it to, and then it maps the bottom of any hits or large metal content that it picks up, and then gives pictures of what it is. So this would come back after a full day of mapping the bottom, and then show pictures of maybe 30 hits, which would be sunken landing barges, which then gives our divers something to go and investigate. And generally, around these barges, they'd find different kinds of munitions, whether it's stuff being transported to shore or whatnot. The CHEA LCMD that they used when investigating all these hits proved to be very effective. It was the mine detector we use, and no other metal detector brought by the other EOD teams was effective underwater. So that was definitely a point that we took away for the next time. And we didn't have enough of them because every team wanted to use ours as they're so effective. As well as nothing beat the local knowledge. Even 500 meters offshore, some of the local fishermen in their canoe would be able to bring you right to the site of an airplane bomb and show you exactly where it is. And in the end, with all the fancy equipment, that proved to be the best way to find things. The underwater clearance, depending on the condition of the munition, either had to be blown in place or moved to a stack to be disposed of. Here's a couple pictures of different stacks. There's our divers. Here's the Australian divers with one of their stacks.
How can you tell they're Australian?
I just know. Some interesting cases that we came across was the only fish bomb found of the operation. This was found 500 meters off of Red Beach. As you can see, it's a beer bottle with the explosive substance in it. There is no fuse. Either the fuse failed to function the device, and it is scotch taped to a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft round. I'm not sure what they were thinking, but it failed to go off, and our operators just bipped it and just got rid of it. Here's a chemical munition that our operators found on the Russell Islands. Right away, they suspected it of being a chemical device based on the swelling around the driving bands. And that led them to x-ray it on site, and they were able to find the long burster. I'm unsure if it is a mustard or what kind of chemical it is, but they just marked it, reported it up to the Australians, and left it. There has been stories in past groups that have gone there and blown them in place and shot mustard all over the air, which isn't really too good. So overall, the Canadian UXO clearance, we cleared over 3,131 pieces of ordnance. Main ones being 3 300-pound bombs, as well as an 8-inch naval projectile. Those are really the highlights that we came across. But everything from mortars, grenades, projectiles, quite a bit of French rifle grenades, as well as a couple British mortars and British grenades. So with approximately 1/5 of the EOD manpower, we cleared 1/4 of the ordnance. So our operators definitely carried their weight, and yeah. And as you can see here, group photo. Here's Remus in the front to see what it looks like. There's a couple shots in the background for effect.
That's the fish bombs.
Yeah, those are some big fish bombs. As well, with the Australian ships, when we were underway with EOD operations, they were able to use the crew and tradesmen from their ships to do some good on the islands. They were able to do manual work, installing piping, little water towers, and whatnot in a women's help shelter, a school, and as well as another school out in Tulagi. So everyone was pretty happy with that. Some of the challenges that we came across: the quick deployment and the rush preparation. This was set to be an exercise up until about beginning of October, until it switched over into an operation. So we had a short amount of time to get a lot of paperwork and whatnot to turn it into an operation. As well as, this is the first op of this nature for operators. Most of our operators, they have the advanced CMD course. They don't have a lot of opportunities like this in Canada to kind of replicate and practice their skills. A lot of the guys they're picking up ordnance in someone's basement, or they're getting MLMs off the coast, but they usually don't see this amount of ordnance and this variety. As well, myself as task force commander, I didn't have the advanced CMD course. Not a showstopper, but it would have been useful. Conclusion. So overall, it was an excellent learning opportunity for our operators. They learned a lot. They were able to give back a lot to the other EOD teams, as well as the Solomon Island Police Force EOD teams who learned quite a bit from us. We did build and work on the ties with our allies, and we did create quite a dent in the ERW problem to the Solomon Islands. Over 12,000 pieces of ordnance. It was a surge of EOD activity to be able to give the RSIPF EOD a little more breathing room, so they could catch up a little bit with the problem. Op Render Safe 14 is set to take place in November this year in Bougainville, Papua New Guinea. Rumor is that it's going to be led by the Australian Army, and it will be sea platform based. So the operators will be working off a ship, just based on the lack of infrastructure there for the operators. And this explosion here is approximately, I think, 26 300-pound bombs being detonated at the same time. Some fish were hurt in this, but the locals would all stand on the shore, then come out in their canoes and be able to scoop them up, and our guys would be able to give the fish over, so no fish went to waste. Does anyone have any questions?
There's time for questions, so please go ahead.
Over there.
Okay, John, I'll jump in first. Just, you mentioned about the Che detectors working well underwater. Was there any significant capability deficiencies equipment-wise that you or the Canadian operators faced while you were over there?
No, our equipment was good. We were only really limited to what we were able to bring based on the timelines, but what we brought did work well. In the future, we would explore other methods of transportation, because we went commercial air and we took bags with us. So we had 4 to 5 bags a person, and we had to, through security, out of security, where hopefully next time, either a plane can be, military aircraft can be taken, or it can just be shipped beforehand and picked up on site, and we could take more things. Because we weren't really self-sufficient. We had to rely on the Australians for dive equipment, X-rays, 60 series, just manual hand tools, machetes, and that kind of thing.
Fair enough.
How difficult was it identifying the Japanese munitions? Did you have a lot of background knowledge or books or references, and did you take anything away that was specific to Japanese munitions that you, the operator, should know?
We, as we got there on the ground, we underwent a couple of days of what's called FIT training, force integration training, where we got presentations from both the Australians as well as the Solomon Island Police Force on Japanese munitions, underwater munitions, a bunch of different lectures and whatnot. And they have a bunch of inert ordnance there that you can look at. It is a pretty good training area, as well as all the teams received separate little pubs which highlighted the differences, and the 60 series. The guys could take measurements and they'd be able to figure it out. After a while, you would see a lot of the same things popping up. Guys could eyeball it and just know based on the shape. Once again, they would roll through and see what it is. So we did get pretty good at it. And the Solomon Island Police Force guy with us generally would look at it and be like, that's what this is. From 20 feet away, he'd know exactly what it is and everything about it. That helped out a lot.
Is there anything special that you got to take into account the Japanese munitions versus the US?
Yeah, a lot of times, depending on the munitions, they use different chemical. A lot of Japanese munitions use picric acid, which crystallizes and is a lot more sensitive. So depending on what the ordnance was and everything, yeah.
I apologize for my late arrival. I understand there were 2 Canadian teams. What was the makeup of the teams? How many sappers were there?
So we had a dive team with 4 Navy clearance divers, a dive team leader, and 3 dive team members. Two were from the Pacific coast, two were from the Atlantic coast. The the land team was made up of 2 engineers and 2 air weapon technicians. Then as well, myself and a senior technical advisor, we'd work in and out of the headquarters there. When we had a chance, we'd jump in with the teams to assist.
Did you have to carry any medical treatments in case of accidental chemical exposure?
We didn't. As a Canadian team, we didn't have any chemical decontamination kit. One of the Australian teams brought it with them. They didn't carry it. It was more of an issue on Russell Island as opposed to Guadalcanal. I believe the teams out there didn't as well. All the teams were rolling around with either a medic or a medical officer with them at all times, as well as where we were in Guadalcanal Beach Resort, the Australians had contracted out to a civilian medical company called Aspen, which had an air medevac capability, and I believe. And then part of the force integration training was doing a full demonstration of that and showing the speed and whatnot and a full run through. So. Sure.
So now that you've done some rendering safe on the islands, how big is the problem persist? Is it still another 50 years? What is their projection of being able to deal with this threat on the islands?
The Royal Solomon Island Police Force warrant, whose name is Rex Wywery, he was asked that same question, and he said forever is how long it would take. This is really the tip of the iceberg. At one point, you could pick up the forest floor and lift it, and you'll just see a clutter of munitions. We put a dent in it, but there's still quite a bit there. And that's only in the central province. There's still other ordnance scattered around. We could have been there for another couple months. We wouldn't have gotten it all. So there could probably be another render safe that's going to take place there in the next couple of years.
So if we send a squadron next time, they'll be well employed?
Yeah. No one will be bored. There's no lack of work to do there.
That would save on committing a strategic airlift too.
Any other questions for John? Well, John, thanks very much for that. That is perfect, and that's what we expect and like to see at our Lunch and Learns. Relevant information based on either a current operation, and at times we go with an historical flavor, and in line with preserving this history, although very recent history, which is why we film and record. Jay will clean that up, and it'll be posted to YouTube within the next few weeks, and also hung on the new CMEA website. So John, on behalf of the chapter,